Worldcom was once one of the biggest and greatest telecommunications companies around the world. Led by their CEO, Bernard Evers, Worldcom grew exponentially over the course of its existence. From its beginnings in 1983 as long-distance discount services to its demise as Worldcom. But before the fall, there was the rise, and Worldcom rose like no other. The company was notorious for multiple aggressive mergers with other companies, including buying MCI for a total of $37 billion. Worldcom was a superstar, and Bernie Evers was constantly being praised in the media, and everything was going right for them, until the fourth quarter of 1999. This is when the illusion of success began to unravel. It all began when Comptroller David Myers brought the financial statements in to Scott Sullivan, the CFO of Worldcom, and the numbers were far from what they had expected.
Scott's probably the brightest person I've ever met in my life, from a financial perspective or almost any perspective. And when someone that you respect from an intelligence perspective, I mean, there's obviously a lot of loyalty and everything else. When he says that he knows for a fact that the information that you're providing is wrong, that you've made a mistake, you assume, or I assumed that we had made a mistake. And so we went back and reworked the numbers again, coming back to, for all intents and purposes, the same number. All of this time frame, we're a public company. Public company is about to release its quarterly earnings, and so the time frame to release your earnings is set. The time that we're at this point trying to figure out what's wrong, is we're creeping closer and closer to the time we have to release our earnings. So Scott actually tells me, I know the numbers are wrong, I know what they should be, we need to book an entry to get where I know we should be, and then we'll figure out what the error is at the end of the quarter, and the next quarter is going to be just the same error, but the opposite direction. The two will wipe out each other, and everything will be fine, but you need to produce an entry this quarter to fix the problem that I know is there. And that was the real pressure that the accounting department was put under, was producing an entry that was based on the CFO's thought process of what he thought the number should be, as opposed to what we knew the underlying answer was.
Corporations, especially those as large as Worldcom, have an ethical and moral obligation to do what is right and to be honest. This is called social corporate responsibility, and it is needed for many reasons. Aside from avoiding what happened to Worldcom and Enron and all the other fallen giants, social corporate responsibility is necessary because it is what earns the public's trust. It is what will convince investors to invest and makes the company more attractive and appealing to everyone, which means that more people will see the company as something that they would like to be a part of, whether it is by subscribing, consuming, or investing, or so on and so forth. In Worldcom's case, there was no such ethical code or moral standard of behavior. In fact, it was the opposite. When efforts were made to establish a corporate code of conduct, the CEO, Bernie Evers, reportedly described it as a, quote, colossal waste of time. When the CEO of a company has that kind of attitude towards ethics and morals, it does not bode well for what the other employees must think of ethics and morals. As such, the corporate culture in Worldcom, in fact, almost promoted unethical behavior, as long as the employees were making money and hitting those numbers. During the investigation, it was revealed that there was a substantial amount of sloppy and fraudulent bookkeeping, and after the bankruptcy audit, more pieces of information surfaced which further detailed the amount and the magnitude of the fraud being committed. The accounts showed that Worldcom had overvalued most of their acquisition by a total of $5.8 billion. Mr. Evers, who was the CEO of Worldcom at the time, had improperly booked billions in expenses, which, as a result, went on record as the largest accounting scandal in United States history. The main stakeholders involved were the employees and directors of Worldcom. Other stakeholders involved were the government agencies, investors, suppliers, and competitors. The key players were Worldcom's former CEO Bernie Evers, the former CFO Scott Sullivan, and the former comptroller David Myers. Ebers persuaded Worldcom's board of directors to provide him corporate loans and guarantees in excess of $400 million to cover his margin calls. The board hoped that the loans would avert the need for Ebers to sell a substantial amount of his Worldcom stock, as his doing so would result in a further decrease of the stock's price. However, this strategy failed. In April of 2002, Ebers resigned as CEO. He had used fraudulent accounting methods alongside his colleagues and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The company's auditors also held Sullivan responsible for the accounting mess, and Sullivan was soon arrested on charges of fraud and misrepresentation. Former Comptroller David Myers pleaded guilty to securities fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and filing false statements on September the 27th of 2002. After the sensational news that the Worldcom financial fraud had been released, a lot of immediate actions were rapidly taken throughout the entire company. The Securities and Exchange Commission charged Worldcom with fraud, and the Justice Department began a criminal investigation of its business practices. The CFO, Scott Sullivan, and the Comptroller, David Myers, were dismissed right away. A job cut of 17,000 employees was executed. Many non-substantial assets were sold, and the payment of preferred dividends was enforced. Moreover, the scandal led to a result of tremendous loss of customers and benefited its competitors. And meanwhile, the top management was totally cleared off, and the entire board of directors was substituted by a new one to ensure the integrity and reliability. A new auditor was taken to the position to re-audit the financial statements. Worldcom was confronting huge losses of public pension funds, over $1 billion, and frustrated investors with tremendous loss. The New York State Common Retirement Fund claimed a $300 million loss, and the California Fund lost $565 million on Worldcom bonds and stock, among many others. In 2005, Scott Sullivan pleaded guilty, and the CEO, Bernie Ebers, was charged with 1 count to commit securities fraud, 1 count of securities fraud, and even 7 counts of fraud related to false filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and was sentenced to 25 years in prison at the age of 63. Following the scandal, Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, in which it introduced the most extensive set of new business regulations since the 1930s. It is a legislation that protects shareholders and the general public from accounting errors and deceitful practices in the enterprise. It requires companies to assess the strength of internal controls and to report any material weaknesses, as well as requiring auditors to suggest whether the controls are adequate. In result, it has led to a rise in spending on audits. It made it more difficult for United States corporations to get foreign listings, and it made investors pay more attention to reliability and transparency of businesses. This act also creates stricter criminal penalties for securities fraud and alters how public accounting firms run their businesses. In conclusion, Worldcom was one of the largest telecommunication companies around the world. They committed several types of fraud, including fraud of false filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. They blindly focused on growth by strings of 60 acquisitions by numerous takeovers, which led to falsely increase their stock prices, though by falsely inflating their assets and takeover bids. The corporate culture did not encourage transparency down the hierarchy. There was asymmetric information among different people in the organization, and there were many questions raised, but they were meticulously buried by the CEO and CFO, who were the masterminds behind the entire operation. The immediate impact of this demise: 17,000 innocent breadwinners lost their jobs, and over $1 billion of pension funds went down the drain.